On units, there are multiple systems of units that are out there, different ways of measuring things. Say, for example, for height, you could talk about your height in feet, or you could talk about it in meters. The first one, feet, would be an example of something in the U.S. customary system. This is the set of units that most Americans use on an everyday basis. Things like miles or feet for distance, inches. You talk about how many pounds you weigh. You could talk about a gallon of milk or a quart of this or something like that. Typically these are U.S. customary units that we'd be talking about there. In science, though, typically we tend to use a system that's different, one that is a little bit easier to use because of the fact that its units all go into each other by factors of 10. As you know, there are 12 inches in a foot, but 3 feet in a yard, 16.5 feet in a rod, and all sorts of weird types of units that get out there. But metric system units, which is the sort of everyday term for our international system that we'll talk about in a second, is the metric system. These types of units always are factors of 10 into each other, so 10 or 100 or 1,000 or something like that. So we're going to use in this class and in all science classes the International System of Units, the SI system, so-called because of the French wording of International System of Units is why it's SI and not IS. So these would be things like as are on the table below, that the unit of length is in meters, the volume in liters, time is seconds, that one you're fairly familiar with. Mass is in grams, temperature would be Kelvin or Celsius is another one we'll use in this class. Energy in joules. There are other ones like Newton is a unit of force. But these are certain common base units you see in the SI system. So if you want to talk about how tall someone is, you would say they're so many meters tall, or how much time has passed, it's been so many seconds, and so on and so forth. So these are the ones that you'd use. One of the problems you run into with these types of units, though, is that, okay, you can describe yourself as being 1.9 meters tall. That's fine. But what if you want to describe the size of a flea? A meter is much too large. I mean, it's a little over 3 feet. You wouldn't want to describe a flea as being 0.000034 meters or whatever. That would be very unwieldy. We need a better set of units. Similarly, it's over 1 billion, actually it's over 100 billion meters to the sun from the Earth on average. You wouldn't want to describe that in terms of meters. You'd instead want a different set of units that would allow you to figure this out and allow you to make these units in much more easy to use forms. And so to do that, the metric system, or the SI system, uses a series of prefixes added to these units. The SI prefixes, the smaller ones and larger ones, are both listed here. They typically work as I'm about to show you, is that if you talk about, say, something very small, like our flea, is that if we were going to measure him, we would want something that's a much smaller unit. An example of this might be something like, say, we might measure him in micrometers. And so the reason why we know this would be because we'd say, well, okay, a flea is how much smaller than a meter? You'd say, well, a flea is going to be, you know, less than, well, under 1,000th of a meter, but larger than 1,000,000th of a meter. So we say, well, 1,000th would be what power of 10? Well, 1,000th would be 10 to the negative third. 1,000,000th would be 10 to the negative sixth. Since the flea would fit somewhere in between these, we would use the unit that's sort of in between each of those. And so as a result, that we are going to go ahead and we would say he'd be measured in micrometers is the way you do it. Similarly, if we were going to talk, say, about the distance between the Earth and the Sun, we said that's over 100 billion meters. And so a billion is 10 to the 9th power. So we look for our value for 10 to the 9th, and we say, oh, there's 10 to the 9th right there. And so we would measure that in gigameters. So we'd say it's going to be so many gigameters away from the Earth to the Sun. And so this is basically how our SI units work, how our prefixes work. You add the prefix onto the unit in order to create a unit which is larger or smaller than the one that you had originally, so that you can have one that fits what you're measuring a whole lot better.